Patrice Vecchione.
Okay, and then what is your relation to Nick?
I'm Nick's eldest daughter.
Awesome. What's your favorite and best memory of Nick at Stevenson?
Well, so it's not a direct memory because I wasn't there for this, but this is a story I heard from my father and from a few other people. When my father was at Stevenson, the 20 years that he was proctor and senior preceptor there, it was in the heyday of the drug days, marijuana and everything else. And one night my father came upon a student who was unconscious, and he knew this kid had a proclivity for doing a few of the more, shall we say, advanced drugs. And he couldn't get the young man to wake up. And so there was a cop there who called 911, and my father tried to get this guy to come to consciousness. And finally 911 came, and they took the kid to the hospital. A few days later, he called my father from Dominican. My dad went to visit him, and he opened his hospital gown up in the front and said, "Nick, what the hell happened to me?" And all over the guy's chest were these bruises. And my father said, "I did that. Nobody dies on my shift. I beat the shit out of you to keep your heart working." And that is my favorite, though it's not personal, obviously, thank God. But that's my favorite memory because that's very much who my father was.
I have many. Because I was with him as a student and as worked with him later as a colleague. He used to be in the coffee house at night. He would tell me what was going on when I was the manager there. So he was kind of my eyes. But there's several. One is that before he gotten cancer, for the longest time he used to smoke cigars. So as he would tour the dorms, he would smoke a cigar. Doesn't always light it up, but usually gave him a little bit of a smell or a little bit of cigar smoke. So you kind of had a little bit of warning when you were in the dorms. So if maybe you were doing something that was not quite that he could say something about, it was a good warning to either to get out of the hallway or close your door or something like that. But he was also he was a hard. Also, there are other things that he was a practical joker. He would do all one time they married off one of the preceptors here. They married him off to a statue in the coffee house. And they did a whole ceremony where they carted him off and they married him to the statue. One time when I was as a coffee house manager, I came into my office and strung up from the lights, sitting in the middle was this 2 or 3 foot dead, smelly shark, just hanging there. It's just those kind of silly things. So I don't know. He was memorable, but he was tough as nails, but he was also heart of gold. He could be. You just take him with a grain of salt, and he would curmudgeon. He was just like his name, old man. But if you really needed something, he would be there for you. If you needed $20, if you needed help with something else, he would really back you up. As long as you didn't screw with him and you were honest and you helped, he was there behind you 100%.
Well, Nick was, I think, approaching retirement at the time that I became provost, and he had become just a little bit controversial. Not so much with me, but I think with student affairs, because his approach to being a proctor was a bit looser than what was kind of becoming the prevailing standard. So he was a little bit out of step with what student affairs was pushing for.
Santa Cruz. Yeah.
Which of course made him actually very attractive to me as far as I was concerned, because he was very, I would not say he wasn't a disciplinarian. He was very forgiving, right? That was his strategy. But he was very consistently trying to get the students to rein in and channel in their energies, right? So he was tolerant of alcohol, he was tolerant of a variety of little peccadillos, but his goal was always to cut students a little bit of slack in order to let them grow up without getting harmed. But the focus was on not getting them harmed, right? Not letting things escalate out of control. Now, the first time I met him, and this is one of those sort of unforgettable moments, because he's really unprepossessing, right? I mean, he doesn't look dynamic. He's not tall and really outgoing. He's just a very friendly person who charms you over time. The first time I met him, he introduced himself and said, and I said, "Oh, you're the proctor at Stevenson." He says, "Actually, I'm the chief proctologist." And it took me a second to realize that he was just joking. But he had that kind of sense of humor. I mean, that is, and that's probably one of my fondest memories of him.
He loved his students, and anytime somebody would say, "Hey Nick, got $20 I could borrow?" my father would give them the money, and then when they would go to pay my dad back, he'd say, "No, don't give me the money back. I want you to pass that on. Give it to the next guy who needs a few bucks." And so, inspired by that, my sister and I established the Nick Vecchione Stevenson College Memorial Emergency Fund, so that the provost will be able to offer support to students who are in need of a few bucks, kind of like can't buy the textbooks or late on the rent or whatever it is, to help people out.
I have two. On campus, when we had our orientation with him, our first week at Stevenson, Nick said, "This is my position. I'm here to make everybody safe, and do what you want as long as you're safe and you're kind to each other and you take care of each other." It's like, don't make me come and find you and tell you how to be safe and kind. He's like, just use your judgment. If you need me, I'm here. And don't let anything seep out under the doors or sit on the windowsill. So one of the things that he was being funny about that, because that was back in the late 70s. And I immediately knew that he was there not as a person of authority to make sure that we were following the rules and complying, like many of the people in my high school had been. The counselors and the principal and the deans were very much about conforming and doing it the right way. He established early on that he had a sense of humor, that he was there for us, that he was there to keep us safe and not to be the rule keeper. And so my concerns about coming to school, I was only 17. I wasn't worried about the studies. I wasn't worried about my own self, my own behavior. I was worried about living around so many teenagers, and that made me nervous because they're not always safe. But Nick made me feel really safe because he not only connected with me, but he was about all the kids, not just the cool kids or not just the nerdy kids or not just the artistic people, but he had a clear understanding of where we were in our place in life, and that he wanted us to build community. He didn't want to be that. It wasn't about Nick, it was about us and living in a safe environment where there was respect. And he was the perfect scout mom because it was about us. And right away with he had a little, I think it was a Greek fishing hat he would wear, and his big glasses, and he would go around. He smoked cigars back then. You could do that, I think. And I always, when I saw him, I knew it was like, there's my bud. He's keeping watch on us. So just meeting him right away, I felt safe, and like the adult presence there was the best that there could be. And my other memory of him was going on the bus with my girlfriend downtown to visit Nick at his other job, because he worked at a cigar shop. It was like a tobacco shop downtown. And it was across from where Verve is now. And I remember taking the bus and being so excited to go down and surprise Nick at his other job. And so you know, we got off and walked on the mall, and it was very different back then, but going in and seeing him in his other element outside of Stevenson, and you know, it was like going to visit, you know, Paul Newman off set. It was just great, and he was so kind to us when we walked in the door. He's like, hey, and you know, it was just greeted us in a way that made us feel like, you know, we were his friends, his buds, and he was excited to see us. It wasn't like, what are you doing here? Why aren't you on campus? He was just really, you know, happy to see us, and there weren't that many adults in my life who would have responded that way with me just showing up at their place of employment. So, yeah.
So one of my favorite memories of Nick is the first day I met Nick. I was a first-year student, undergraduate student, one of our first dorm meetings, and in walks this guy wearing a sailor's hat, and he's swinging a big red fire axe. And he's telling us all about the rules, what goes on at night at Stevenson, and he's telling us about discretion and how if we're discreet, that we can, you know, get away with almost anything. And if we're not discreet, and he just kind of let that big red axe swing there, and the message was pretty clear. So I always remember that about Nick and how he taught us all about discretion.
I guess my favorite memory is just that he was somebody who was just seemed to be always there. You know, if you were walking around, you would inevitably see him walking around in the college. And he was one of those people that really helped define Stevenson College, I think. You know, he was one of those people you always expected to see. And if you lost your keys, he was somebody you could go talk to. So, but he was always very nice to me and always very pleasant. You know, seemed to be having a good time being at Stevenson.
Okay, favorite or best stories about Nick? There are so many, it's hard to know where to begin. There was one time around 1987 or 88, I was living in dorm 6, and my friend Tommy and I were hanging around late at night, and we decided to go and try and find Nick. We followed the trail of cigar smoke, and eventually we found him somewhere around the coffee shop. He wasn't doing very much, and he asked us if we would like to go downtown to get some pancakes. So the three of us piled into his VW Bug, drove downtown, went into Denny's. He greeted a few people. He always knew someone wherever we went, it seemed. We sat down, he chatted with the waitress, ordered food without looking at the menu. We had wonderful pancakes, talked about this and that, and eventually we piled back into the VW Bug, drove back up to campus, and by the time we got up to the road that goes around the edge of campus towards Stevenson, there was a very heavy fog, and you could not see a thing. And I kept thinking Nick should really slow down. But the VW was purring along, he was laughing, filled with glee, and I remember feeling simultaneously absolutely terrified and somehow very safe. And I knew that somehow nothing bad could happen to me as long as Nick was driving. Another memory was one time when I was in my dorm room talking with Nick. I had some trouble or other. I was worried about something, filled with angst, couldn't decide about this or that, I don't remember. And Nick patiently listened, offered me this bit of advice or that. But eventually I think he got frustrated somehow with me, with all my worries. And he leaned forward and pulled up his sleeve and showed me a long scar on his arm. And I hadn't seen it before, and I was shocked and didn't know what to say. And he explained to me how he got it, and then he said something about how life is full of risks, nothing is perfect, you don't know what's going to happen. And that's not just scary, he said, that is one of the most wonderful and incredible things in the world. And then I wanted to tell you about the Men's Dorm 6 calendar that we made while I was living in the dorms as a fundraiser. Nick helped us out with this from afar, a smile and a wink. He also volunteered to be Mr. December in red tights and a Santa hat. We had a lot of fun with this, and we had a lot of fun with Nick in all kinds of ways in those years, and in years after I stayed in touch with him. He visited him now and then. And I really consider him a friend, a mentor. I'm going to miss him very much. Yeah, I think we're all going to miss him very much.
I have to say, I can remember one night coming out, doing my rounds, and he was doing his rounds, and he encountered a skunk, and he got sprayed. So he had a time that night. And it cracked me up. Just the fact that that happened because skunks would run around here all the time, but to walk up on one and startle it, it can spray you. So he got caught with the spray ones. So that would be one of my funniest memories.
A lot of memories of Nick, a lot of stories. We were together from 1983 as proctors and preceptors until 1990. And there were some years that Nick and I saw each other virtually every day. So there are a lot of stories, some of which were, beginning to be raised and surfaced in this period of remembrance. I remember going down to the police headquarters and keeping the cops busy while Nick removed police records of a student who wanted to join the military. I remember the students across the way who drew holes in the ceiling so that they could brew beer in the basement and pump it up to their dorm room. I remember the pot plants in House 1. The students, as long as it was for domestic consumption, it was fine. As soon as they started selling, Nick and I told them that 50% had to go to the Proctor Retirement Fund. So that usually got rid of the export market. I remember the Italian Sausage Society. Every Friday out on the knoll, we used to grill various Italian sausages, sing That's Amore by Dean Martin, and drink beer for 2 hours. I remember the Gonzo parties in House 1. Gonzo was a party where every room in the dorm had a different drink, and they would keg 6 kegs at a time. That was in the good old days. And Nick and I would go in and say, you can't keg 6 kegs. You're not going to be able to drink 6 kegs of beer. And so we would make them ration the amount of beer that was drunk in the dorm. I remember the time that they broke into my apartment and rebuilt it in the quad. I remember every birthday, my birthday, Nick would hire a group of bagpipers from San Jose who would come and wake me up at 6 o'clock in the morning in House 4. And we would have bagpipes, and the whole quad would be doing Tai Chi at 6 o'clock in the morning. I remember the Stevenson dinners. I remember the number of students we bailed out of the county jail. I remember the rugby team used to be based up here, so we used to have a lot of fun and games with the visiting rugby team sometimes. I remember watching the Hill Street Blues in the TV room in the coffee shop at 2 o'clock in the morning. There was no crime. If there was any crime, it wasn't being committed at Stevenson, because all the cops used to hang out at Stevenson. So we knew that there was nothing going on here. What was happening in the rest of the campus was, a whole other thing. What else is there? I remember Socrates walking out of House 5, stoned out of his mind. That cat did more drugs than any student I've ever met. I mean, he was a total stoner. And the cat lived till he was 23. I mean, Socrates is a legend. And that's who's buried outside the coffee shop is the cat. We buried him in there, and we buried him under 6 foot of concrete. You'd need a nuclear bomb to dislodge the cat, because student affairs at that time didn't want us to bury the cat on campus. So when we put him in there, we made sure he was in there, and that he's never going to leave that place. Socrates was a legend around. The cat and he and Nick had a love-hate relationship. And it went both ways. Sometimes Nick loved the cat and the cat hated Nick, and vice versa. And we used to have to protect Socrates from the foxes, because there was a beautiful silver fox that used to live on the knoll. And Socrates and the silver fox did not get along at all well. So that was a great memory. So I remember too that I used to have an old 2002 BMW. Nick had the old VW, and when we used to go down to the wharf, we used to pile both our cars full of students, and then we used to race coming back up Bay Street. And I remember once that the accelerator stuck on the BMW, and I nearly took out the guard kiosk at the entrance to campus, and I just managed to swerve the BMW. Nick went around a building and through the traffic lights in order to beat me. But we just used to have tremendous fun. I mean, it was a completely different atmosphere on campus. And I think it was important because for Nick and I, we believed that it was important to let students grow up and that students had to find their path, but that our job was to make sure that they didn't screw up too badly and that it wasn't irrevocable. But in 1990, I think as a lot of universities across the United States, universities became much more worried about litigation, about the reaction of parents to excessive drinking, alcohol, drugs, other things. And so they began to worry more and more about the legal consequences of letting students engage in these behaviors. And so the campus environment became a little bit more restrictive. They began to ask us to check on students and to keep names. And at that point, Nick and I said, screw this, we're out of here. We retired. I think myself, Nick, and Mike Pooley, the three proctors, I think you call them community service officers now. My God, things have changed. The three of us quit. We weren't in the business of keeping records and surveillance. That wasn't why we were here. We were educators. And so we left. But it was Nick was here 20 years. Loved the place, but we've got stories that could fill books.
I don't have any very specific memories beyond the kind of memories that people have related as being a little bit of a father figure, a friend, somebody who was in a position of authority but wasn't authoritative, and somebody who got along with everybody and was everybody's friend.
I just remember living on campus for 3 years. Nick was a fixture, and he was just always a calming, easygoing, open, kind person to run across your paths would cross. I don't know, once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week, whenever you're out walking around. And again, almost gave you a sense of home.
I remember Nick's, ever-present cigar. You kind of knew when he was around, and as everybody else has said, he was like your favorite uncle, the father figure. Yeah. He got you back to the dorm when you needed to be taken back there. He was just a real figure for us all, I think.
So Nick taught me that you could be a figure of authority without actually acting on it, without actually penalizing somebody. Advice is actually just as important as action. And I had another experience on campus where police gave me advice instead of giving me a ticket or taking me down. And Nick was like that. That's what he taught us, how to be really good human beings. And he cared about us because even after school when we were living off campus, he would come to parties and he cared about how we were doing and what we were doing. It's a rare bird, and if this university can find anybody else even have that, it is just really an asset.
So I just loved him, and I think my favorite memory is when we did Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are Dead. I set up shop in the dorm. I made all the costumes for the show, and I think I also did the poster. And I don't think I was in it because all you guys were. Nancy was, and you were, and Tony was, and Nick was. And he was such a good sport. And so I think the thing that's so wonderful is, and everybody's saying the same thing, he was totally willing to be one of us but he also held a boundary, that he held a context, so we knew we were safe, you know. And it got really too late, he locked it up, but he also unlocked it for us. So he was awesome.
Of course, I never exhibited anything but exemplary behavior.
We know that.
So,
That's Howard.
Such a good boy.
I didn't interact with him. No, but the thing about Nick, okay, the thing about Nick was that he knew more about Stevenson than anything and anybody. If you had a question about where something would be, and he had a flashlight, I remember, I mean, he just knew where everything was. So he was the one you always went to if you had any questions or needed anything. He just knew everything about it.
Well, I'd kind of forgotten about that. But you know, we all have these great connections with our professors and moments in section we can remember with even a TA. But Nick was 24/7, you know, he was always around. And I saw him at, we had a reunion, how many years was it, 20 years ago or something, at Louise's apartment, she had a little party and he came, so we were adults then, you know. And, or, you can tell.
Not yet.
But anyway, he said, you know, this was a good class. That's what he told me. He says, I've been there a long time. You guys were a good class. So
Challenging.
We were.
Dig into it.
Like Randy, it was refreshing to me to see that somebody in what I was used to being sort of oppressive authority figures, you know, whipping into shape. Here was a guy who took it on a case-by-case basis. He was interested in your best interest. It was always, you know, just so refreshing and nice to be treated that way. And like Howard, I wasn't out after dark much. I was busy with prayer and so
Well, I apparently am the only one who didn't have a relationship with Nick, just in passing, but the warmth about him. You know, you passed him and you felt warm. And I certainly hope that at the end of my road, if people are talking about me, because I'm not here, that they say that I made a difference and I had their back.
There you go.
Yeah.
I'm wrong.
Yeah. That's very good. Yeah, I actually was one of the tamer people. But my roommate, no. So yeah, I can only just sort of echo some of these things, that Nick was really an actual personal friend to everybody, and really did sort of hold the line and keep everybody safe. Now I'm talking.
Now Mike, on the other hand,
I have
There's some stories.
something, but I'll tell one story about Nick. I remember coming back from Thanksgiving vacation and was walking through the quad late at night, and Nick came up, and I was very high, basically. And he said, Mr. Pack, how did Thanksgiving go? And that seemed like such a difficult question. All I could think was lots of turkey, and I just kept saying, he goes, lots of turkey, lots of turkey. So after that, every time I'd see him, he'd say, how's it going, Mr. Pack? And he'd go, lots of turkey. Plenty of turkey.
How did your father influence who you are?
My father, here's the part where I'll probably cry. My dad is an enormous influence on who I am. My dad's the smartest person I ever knew. He could speak as well on things he knew a lot about, just as well as on things he knew nothing about. But it's really my dad's artistic personality. I'm from New York City, so he's from New York City. And when I was a little girl, he would take me to the Museum of Modern Art, and he loved the painter Modigliani. So he would take me to stand in front of these paintings, and he would say, look at how he painted the hair. Look at the length of her neck. Look at the color blue on her sweater. My father taught me how to see the world and how to love the beauty of the world. We'd be walking along in Manhattan, and he'd say, stop, look. And I'd like, okay, whatever, look around. I'm a little kid. I'd say, yeah? Look at the color of the light on the brick building over there. So he was the most observant person I knew. He could judge a person's character in 20 seconds. He would say, oh, that person did it, whatever it is. And he was usually right. I mean, if it was someone I knew, I'd go, how did you realize that so quickly? How did you peg that person? And I am a writer and a visual artist, and I attribute that to my dad.
Well, yeah, he gave me a really great perspective of what it means to be a preceptor, because he had done it for many years. He resided in House 6, he resided in House 1, so upper quad, lower quad. He worked both sides of the drawing board, if you will. I remember one of the first couple of years of being here, of having a conversation with him where, you know, one of his pit sayings was that, you know, the RAs, they should be paying you. They should pay us because of the knowledge and the wisdom that they receive in learning about doing this job. And I thought that was really trend-setting in the sense that, you know, that he gave so much of his time and efforts of really trying to teach people what it means to communicate, what it means to handle situations and circumstances that pop up any given day.
He went through a lot of things through his life, and he went through war. He came here from New York. At that point, he beat pancreatic cancer. Even when he was feeling down, he just had a spark of life, and you get a little glee from him, because he could just, when he was happy, he would get this little chuckle or little funny laugh to him, and it was just gleeful to be around him sometimes.
I would say that growing up where adults had their place and the kids they were watching had their place, and there was a sense of, recognizing authority and following rules and not questioning, Nick was a different kind of adult than I had really seen. And he was the kind of person who was, with all of his other wonderfulness, he was a role model in how to treat others. And so there's this idea of, don't ever let anyone treat you as if they're better than you are. And I remember him saying that and going, okay, because he said, because they're not. And, you are you, and you have rights, and, not whether they're a professor or they're somebody you're going to work for. He said, you're going to come across a lot of jerks in your life, and they're going to treat you a certain way, and that's not right. And so just know that don't let anyone treat you as if they're better than you are. And I thought, oh, this is awesome. Nobody's better than I am. And he said, oh, and sweetheart, by the way, he goes, don't ever think or assume that you're any better than anyone else. So when I think about that as a role model, I had parents, my dad wasn't around so much, but that coming from him, and I've always remembered that when I'm working with, just in the street with other people, whether it's in a coffee shop or whether it's here with my students, that sense of respect where we're all on par, we're all equal. So whether it's somebody who's bussing my table or whether it's the superintendent of the district, I've always seen us as humans. And so Nick had that.
So I owe Nick a lot. Nick was really one of the first people I ever met as a young adult who treated me like a peer and not like a kid. And I think that gave me a lot of confidence back then, and it's something I really appreciate about Nick. He also had a lot of really great personality traits and characteristics that I try to emulate even today. You know, Nick is somebody who would give you the shirt off his back. There are many times I saw Nick reach into his pocket and give a student money if they were broke or needed a little extra help. I saw Nick get in his car and go down and bail people out of jail. So he really believed in Santa Cruz students. Didn't matter who you were or where you came from. I think Nick really believed that you had a lot of potential in you, and he did everything he could to give you every opportunity to let that potential out. So I really think that's a great legacy of his. So one of the things that Nick taught me that's really great is how important it is to have friends sort of outside your own age group. When I met Nick, he introduced me to Mike Weber, who was a preceptor in House 4 and later became one of Stevenson's proctors. And Mike was older than I was. He was a graduate student at the time that I was a first-year undergraduate student. And of course, Nick was a lot older than I was, but yet I was able to form these really great friendships with both Mike and with Nick, and those friendships have carried on even to today. And, you know, it really provided me with role models of people who I aspired to be like. And I think that Nick was one of the first people who I ever had that kind of relationship with. So that really means a lot to me, and that's something that hopefully one day I'll have the opportunity to pass along.
It has changed me just by making me become more aware of all the different kinds of people it takes to make a place like Stevenson College work. To play, you know, and all the different functions people played. I mean, before I became provost, I worked as a professor, and professors do one thing at the university, or a few things, but we don't do everything. And getting to know people like Nick, who were in some ways far removed from the classroom, but still an integral part of the university, I think gave me a better appreciation of what, you know, an amazing place this university is.
Yeah, friendship always does. Meaningful friendship should. He was my closest friend for 30 years. There's not a single decision, personal, professional, that I've made since I've known Nick that I've not talked to him about. This is the first time I've been in Santa Cruz since he died, and I just can't believe that I'm in Santa Cruz without Nick being here. It feels terrible. You know, you could always rely on him for advice, usually what you didn't want to hear. Jean-Paul Sartre said that we often ask our friends for advice because we know what they're going to say. And that's why we asked them. But with Nick, you never knew. Nick would always say something that would cause you to stop and think and reconsider. So, and I think it's also, he was older than I was, so we crossed a generation. But I think there's also something about male friendships and the longevity of male friendships that's comparatively rare. I think women establish and keep friends, close friends, for longer. And I think for guys it's a little different. And so I really do cherish those friendships that last a long time. Where you know the person, where you can not see them for a few weeks and all of a sudden see them as if nothing had happened, and you just carry on. So his friendship has meant a great deal to me. Opened me up, allowed me to try new things, to loosen up in a certain sense, and to think outside the box more than I might have done otherwise.
What impact or long-lasting legacy did Nick leave with Stevenson or other people?
So my dad was at Stevenson for 20 years, and the job as proctor, when he got that job, was very much a custodial kind of position. It was lock the dorms, lock whatever's unlocked, make sure everyone is okay. And he worked, the job is 8 at night till 4 in the morning. But my father came into that position with a PhD in psychology. he graduated from New School in New York City, and he used to write educational and IQ tests when we lived in New York City. So he had this background that was not custodial at all. It was academic and intellectual. My dad really changed that job so that he would talk to students when they were having a difficult time. And I think the reason there are probably at least half a dozen people named Nick after my dad, who they were students, and then they named their kids, after my father, because he listened to people, to kids, and he listened to the students with as much respect as he would pay anyone who had letters after their name. He honored whatever plight a person was going through. And in that way, he influenced the people who were there during his tenure. And I think perhaps in a sense that legacy lasted beyond his actual years there.
How do you think Stevenson affected or changed Nick?
The 20 years my dad was at Stevenson were the happiest years of his life. So having the chance to create a job, create a position, I mean, he had a title, but he created this, he reinterpreted it. For a while they were hiring a new chancellor, and some students made buttons that said Vecchione for chancellor, and even though he was alive, there was somebody who made the Nick Vecchione memorial urinal that hung outside the coffee house. His joy, I never saw my father as happy as during the time that he was at Stevenson. I think that he felt a sense of purpose, and he had many relationships began there. His very good friends, Mike Weber and Tim Weiner, those friendships began at Stevenson, and I could list other people. Forrest and Dave Moreno, they were policemen there. He was close with Carlos Norena and Joe Silverman, provost during my dad's time. Many relationships. Joy Patman is another one. She's up in Seattle now, and there are others I'm not even remembering, other students. On Facebook, the responses of people clearly indicated that what they meant to him, he also meant to them, and so it was a reciprocal sense of value.
I think I think for a lot of people, he really inspired some people. If you had an idea of something you want to do or else, he would help you out. I mean, if he, if you needed something or whatever, or he was very encouraging people. He always, he was always, good to me. If I need something, he'd help me out. If it was a business process, maybe he'd give you contacts. If it was maybe just some access to something that maybe in these days maybe you wouldn't be allowed to, but like back in the old days, a couple students wanted to brew beer. So back in those days when still alcohol was on campus, they brewed beer in the basement of one of the dorms. And they eventually went on to have a brew pub for a while. So, things like that. And so, he gave them, access to people and the ability for those things to happen. And there are multiple other ways, but I can't think of them all off the top of my head. But so,
is there any individual story you have with him?
I don't know. For some reason, I graduated and then I came back here as a manager at Stevenson after a couple of years. So I was away for a couple of years. But for some reason he took to me. I don't know why. We always got along really well. He would, like I said, he always had ideas if something was going on. If one of my employees was not doing this or that, or if he saw something that was either good or bad, he would let me know. He was I think I'm getting off track the question, but I think it was just a valuable friendship for me. And, you know, and we didn't always see each other after he retired, but when he did, we always just, you know, it's one of those things. There's certain people you don't see very often, but when you do see them, you just kind of click and you just, you know, just have that spark. And for me, he was always a great friend. So
I think many of us of an era just equate Stevenson and Nick Vecchione. It's like captain of the ship, you know, with his hat on, captain of the ship. And so, you know, I don't spend a lot of time at Stevenson now, but when I do go there, I think his spirit is there, and there is that sense of, you know, we are here, we respect each other, and, you know, I don't want to be trite and say it's all good, but he really was there to ensure that it would be. Yeah. So I think that spirit is still there.
I would say Nick left with me a real genuine person that had respect for anyone. He was the kind of guy that'd give up his last dollar if he needed it. And he was a great listener. And I think that was one of the great marks of him, being a great listener.
It's almost impossible for me to think about Stevenson College and not think about Nick Vecchione, because the two were absolutely grafted together in my experience. I met Nick almost the first day I was at Stevenson, and Nick carried the Stevenson flag to our graduation on my last day at Stevenson. And even in all the years after I graduated, coming back to visit Stevenson, I always also stopped in to visit with Nick. And so to me, my Stevenson experience was really a Vecchione experience as well, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
Well, I think as you saw in the memorial, I think for a lot of people, I think Nick was about second chances. That Nick was able to appreciate the fact that life isn't perfect, and that people need, especially at a young age, need to have another chance, and that was something that was very important. I think also Nick was, to use a very old-fashioned phrase, Nick was a deeply honorable man, and so personal integrity and honor, and I mean that in a very, not in a very gendered way, but that your dealings with people had to be honest and have integrity, whether you're dealing with men, women, students of color, LGBT students, whoever you were dealing with, your relationships had to have integrity and honor, and that you could stand by your words, and that was always very, very important to Nick. He really had little time for people who were duplicitous or dishonest with him.
I think the main legacy is all the people that came through Stevenson College. That is his legacy, you know. Everybody who's been a student while he was there and even afterwards, who have heard people talk about him. I mean, one of the nice things about working in the university is that your legacy is people, really. And I think that's his legacy.
My dad had a green Volkswagen Bug that we drove from, when we moved to California, we drove from Chicago to Santa Cruz in this green, 4 of us. And my mother didn't drive. My dad drove the whole way. Well, one day, a group of students apparently literally carried that Volkswagen somewhere. How on earth they did, well, probably not that heavy, maybe there were 10 kids, I don't know. Yeah. And they painted it. And if you go to the Stevenson Facebook page, you will see this, it looks like a psychedelic painting. It's every color of the rainbow, completely abstract painting. And then they showed my dad, here's your car. Now this is a really good story. Okay, this is the side of my dad, the little bit of a rascal.
Yeah.
There was a student who wanted to get into the military, but he had done something either he had been drunk on campus or something. So he had gotten arrested on campus, not, in town, but on campus, or pulled aside. And he had a, quote, record.
Oh, wow.
Right, on campus. So my father and a few other people whose names will remain hidden broke into the police station, found this guy's record, and quietly removed it. They can't punish him now, and I will refuse to mention the names of the living. No, I did write about my dad in my new book, but this is not that. So let me see what page this is called. Finders Keepers. Finders Keepers. Just what can be found with eyes open? $10,000 in coins, anyway, enough to fill a few 5-gallon jugs. When his friend asked for a loan, "Take this," said my father, pointing to a bottle full of the small money other men leave behind. A kind of faith in the possibility a nickel has. The wristwatch I wear daily was left on a park bench till my father came along. Once, shortly after my mother left, bills were due and Dad was down to soda crackers and cigar butts, in line to buy a cigar. With his shoe, he reached for a 50. Most people look in the wrong direction, locating faith above them. Pennies don't fall from heaven. They're down below, more likely to be found near sewer drains, on the asphalt beside dog droppings and spent matches, worn shoes even beggars leave behind.